Well, we have an important person
Yeah.
next on our list. Okay.
Please welcome the most important person in TEDxBISB history.
Mr. John O'Brien from the UN.
Please welcome.
Okay. Well, first of all, I don't think I'm the most important person in TEDx history, but thank you for the introduction. So yeah, I'm working with the UN Development Program in Bratislava for the last 3 years on climate change projects. And basically what I wanted to talk to you today was a little bit about the work that we're doing on climate change. And because the theme of the topic today is about sustainable green cities, I'm also going to talk a little bit about what we're doing with regard to sustainable green cities. So I want to talk to you first about an organization which maybe a few of you in the room have heard of it, maybe some of you haven't. It's called the Global Environment Facility. And the GF is basically a fund that has spent, I think, up to $10 billion in the last 20 years for environmental projects around the world, which includes for sustainable green cities. And one of the areas that GF is working in is in climate change. And that's the area that I've been working in for the last 15 years or so. And the three areas that the GEF works in climate change, the three main areas which I'll tell you a little bit about our projects, it's to do with renewable energy, projects which promote renewable energy efficiency, that's another area where you can reduce emissions, and for sustainable cities it's also a very important area. And thirdly, about transport, which was mentioned previously. So I'm going to talk about those three areas and how they help to shape sustainable green cities of the future. Okay, so the GEF was set up 20 years ago at the time of the Rio conference in 1992, which was a long time ago. And the Rio conference was important because it established the principle of that the global environmental problems need to be solved by the whole world, but the developed countries need to take the lead. So, for example, why should a country like China or India or Brazil have to pay for a problem which was caused by Europe and North America? So there was this idea that we have to do something to solve these problems, but it's not fair to ask countries that didn't cause the problem to pay for it. And this has been a source of debate and argument for the last 20 years, and still today, developing countries think that the payment for these, to solve these problems, like climate change, which I'm going to talk about, should come from developed countries. And so the GEF was set up as a financial mechanism for a number of environmental conventions, and to work in those 6 areas which I mentioned: climate change, international waters, biodiversity, persistent organic pollutants, land degradation, and ozone. And it's spent around $10 billion, and at the moment it's got about $4.34 billion. All the countries of the world who can apply for that money are developing countries. So the money is given by the developed countries, and it's available for developing countries. And at the UN, we help those developing countries access the money and to spend it for environmental projects. Okay? So I'm working for one of the 3 original agencies of the GEF. So when it was set up, there were 3 agencies, which some of you may have heard of. The World Bank was the main one, the largest one. UN Development Program, where I work, and the United Nations Environmental Program. And then you have a bunch of other agencies, which now you can read on that screen, are also able to work with the GEF. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about climate change, because it's always bothered me. I'm from New Zealand, and you have these television debates about climate change, and they have one skeptic and one believer. And the skeptic says climate change has been happening for thousands of years and doesn't exist, and the believer says that the science shows that the climate change is changing. Now these are the measurements from the Mauna Loa laboratory in Hawaii in the United States. How is it not obvious to anybody that something is happening? I mean, look at this graph, and yet we have people, often they're on the payroll of oil companies, large multinationals who don't want to do anything, say the climate is not changing. But look at that graph. It's pretty obvious to me that the build-up of greenhouse gases is happening. You'd have to be crazy to disagree with me. Okay, so this is data from NASA, the National Space Agency in the US, looking at the global surface temperature over the last 130 years, and you can see that the average temperature is now approximately ½ degree Celsius higher than it was, and you can see the trend, and the trend is to go up. Next, sea ice. As you can see, the amount of sea ice is declining at a rate of 11.5% a year, and relative to the earlier range. And some predictions are that in the summer, in the Arctic, there will be no sea ice within 2 years. Earlier predictions were within 30 years, and every time the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change makes new predictions, the new predictions are always worse than the old predictions. And then if you go to the next, so now some people don't believe graphs and slides, but they might believe pictures. So let's have a look at this picture. This is of a glacier in the United States in a place in Montana called Mount Gould. And here are some photos of what it looked like in the summer in 1938, what it looked like in 1981, what it looked like in 1998, and what it looked like in 2006. Do you notice a difference? I do. Okay, so here's what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says is going to happen in the future. So as you can see, the goal of the countries in the world is to try to limit the increase to 2 degrees centigrade above what we have now. And you can see the 3 lines. And the 3 lines are based upon what we do now. And if we're successful in promoting sustainable green cities and promoting emission reductions, we can go to the blue line. If we're less successful, we might go to the red line. And if we go even less successful in the business as usual, we might go to the purple line. And so the range is between 3 and 8 degrees Celsius by 2100. And some people might think, oh, that's not a problem, you know, like Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, once said there'd be less need to have fur coats in the winter. But it is a problem because many scientists believe that at some point there'll be a tipping event so that the whole planet will get out of kilt, and basically a lot of storms and hurricanes and sea level rise will lead, and there'll be a series of natural disasters, and so we don't really know what's going to happen, except that it's not likely to be good. So, what is a green city, and why can a green city help us to combat climate change? Well, the reason a green city is useful is because green cities use less energy. Green cities are cities that are designed to take into account the environmental impacts of the investments in the city infrastructure, energy, water, food, and waste, and to minimize them so that the present generation is not doing what it is doing now, which is having an impact on the ability of future generations to have a productive life. So green cities are important for one important reason is they reduce greenhouse gas emissions, they use less energy. And now I just want to tell you a little bit about what UNDP is doing. What are we doing? So we basically give money to developing countries to help them to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And in this region we have around $100 million of projects. I think we have around 30 or 35 projects dealing with issues related to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And that in 3 areas. We deal with energy efficiency projects, with renewable energy projects, and with transport projects. And energy efficiency is the main focus in this region because of the legacy of the Soviet Union and communism and all that. A lot of the buildings in this region are much more inefficient than they are in Western Europe and the US. So we have a real focus on introducing building codes and on helping countries and governments to improve the energy efficiency of the buildings. And I'll just give you an example about renewable energy. We also focus on projects which promote and encourage renewable energy. You may know in Europe there's been a lot of effort, particularly in Germany and other countries, to provide special tariffs or prices to promote renewable energy. We have a number of projects to deal with solar water heating in Albania. I'm developing some new projects in Ukraine to do with biomass energy. And we also have a project on wind energy in Belarus, where there's not even a single wind farm at the moment. And then we have solar PV as well. I'm also doing a couple of projects in Africa and in Ethiopia. I'm developing a project which will look at solar PV. The problem in Africa is that a lot of people just don't have the ability to pay. If I give you the example of Ethiopia, that's got a population of 80 million people, and 40% of that population, or 30 million people, are living on less than $1 a day. And they don't have access to electricity, and they cook using firewood. And so just to provide those people with basic energy needs, with electricity, with hot water, is really making a difference. And I personally find it very difficult that we live in a world where we've got, I don't know, I think it's like 10,000 millionaires, and yet we have something like 1.5 billion people who don't have access to energy, who don't have money, I went to Ethiopia with Zoran, who's standing in the back, and we made a video about a project of a landfill gas project. And the landfill, we're capping the landfill and capturing the methane, and we'll use that to generate electricity. But on this landfill, there are 650 people who live on the landfill. And and living on a landfill in Africa is not a great thing. So we try to help. That's just about the energy efficiency in buildings, and we focus in particular on buildings, which I mentioned. And then transport. I want to say a little bit about transport. So we have a number of projects on sustainable transport in cities in Batumi in Georgia, Belgrade in Serbia, and in a city in Belarus called Polotsk. And we also have in Bratislava, so I'll tell you a little bit about Bratislava since we're all living in Bratislava. We're focusing on non-motorized transport. We're trying to promote people to do more cycling in Bratislava. We're trying to help with designing a strategy for carpooling. Also, the parking in the city is not great in the city of Bratislava, so we're working with the city of Bratislava to improve the develop a parking strategy. And then we're also looking at improving some of the tram lines, the planning for the tram lines. So Bratislava is behind some of the other countries and cities in Western Europe, and we're learning from the examples in other countries in Western Europe. So anyway, I think I've talked enough because I was only supposed to talk for 12 minutes, and I've already talked for 12 minutes. But perhaps if during the break any of you have any questions about the work that the UN is doing in this region, or would like to know more about any of our projects, I'll be happy to tell you a little bit more in more detail about our projects and what we're doing. So thank you very much, and thank you.